Hey, everybody, welcome to Navel Gazing, the Valley Indy podcast. My name is Eugene Driscoll of valleyindy.org. That's an online newspaper that launched in 2009, covers Ansonia, Derby, and the town of Seymour. My guest for this episode, it's a video episode, as you can see, and it'll also be going out on the podcast networks, is State Representative Rochelle, who represents Ansonia and Derby in the State House of Representatives. Welcome back to the broadcast, Representative Rochelle.
Thank you for having me, Eugene.
So before we begin, there's a lot to talk about. This was a big day in the state. This is like the biggest state lawmaker. I mean, I guess when you pass the whole budget, that's another big day. But so there's a lot to talk about. But before we begin, I wanted to read a word from our sponsor, valleygivesback.org. While giving back is always in session, now is a great time to plan your gift. Name a Valley nonprofit in your estate plan and create a legacy that tells future generations what mattered to you. With the planned gift, you have the power to impact the Valley forever without affecting your current lifestyle. Your action will inspire others to make a difference in their own way. Remember the Valley. Ask your accountant, financial planner, or attorney about planned giving options. Plan now. Give later. Impact tomorrow. Learn more at valleygivesback.org. All right, so like I was saying, it's February 10th, and Governor Lamont this afternoon at high noon made a budget presentation or a budget speech or however you want to call it. It was pre-recorded, so that obviously impacts your job greatly. I guess the first thing I'll ask about, like, I remember going up to Hartford a few times when I was at the News Times at Danbury, and meeting like Ken Dixon from the Connecticut Post, and I didn't have a press pass and he made one for me, because I was getting the Capitol Police were wondering who I was. And I was amazed, like the to-do and the amount of bodies they stuff into a room. And it was just, it was government,
Yeah.
But now how does that work today with, cause you're not up there, right? This is all.
It's very different. So because of COVID, there was an agreement that was worked upon amongst the leaders, Democratic and Republican leaders of the House and Senate. They all agreed on how we were going to operate this year. And so all of the things that we do as a legislature are happening. They're just happening remotely. And in some ways, it's actually, there's advantages and disadvantages to that. So for example, the public hearings. Previously, a public hearing, you'd need to go up to Hartford. There's a certain time of the morning, you put your name on the list to sign up, and then you have to wait all day until your name was called, and then you testify in person. Now that we're doing it remotely, somebody can go online and put their name in and review the list of where they are in line, and then periodically just check back until it's their turn, and they could be home. Last night we had a public hearing for 12 and a half hours yesterday on the insurance committee. And so at 11:30 at night, we're still there, we're still listening. And it was interesting because one of the last people to speak was a nurse who said this actually worked better for her. She had just gotten off her shift. She'd been checking all day on her breaks, which she wouldn't have been able to have done had she had to go to Hartford to testify. So I think in some ways, there's the digital divide that you worry about. People can testify on their phones. They can still submit, email testimony. But in some ways, it's actually making it easier for a lot of people to weigh in on the things that matter to them.
And I saw, I don't cover the state on a daily basis. I'll just throw that out there for anyone who's already angry that I'm not hitting Representative Rochelle up with these tough follow-up questions and I'm starting with such a fluffy topic, but whatever. Governor Lamont has suggested, or one of his proposals is to see Zoom and the use of this technology remain on the local level. Like after, and hopefully it happens sooner rather than later, we get COVID under control, really under control. Do you think we'll see local governments in like Derby and Ansonia continue to use Zoom to bring as much people into these meetings?
So I know that with, that was an executive order that was put in place last year, and part of the legislative process is now in preparation for because the governor is not going to be on executive order forever. So now the legislature, all the committees are looking through all the executive orders to see which ones are worth keeping and bringing to a public hearing and weighing in on and potentially implementing into law. That's one of them. And in fact, I don't know if you recall, but one of the first listening sessions that I had with Rep. Wheelander and Rep. Claire DeStatria, that was actually brought up by a local resident, a local official. And I think that these types of things make government more transparent. And what we really want is people to be engaged, right? It's government by people, for people, and we want them involved. And so if this is going to take some of the mystique out of it and make it more accessible, that's a good thing, in my eyes, at least.
Yeah, I agree, even though I'm not supposed to give my opinion. But all right, so let's get down to brass tacks. I don't know if I'm using that phrase correctly, but there's one issue that I've been covering for 11 years now. And it really hasn't progressed as much as people, at least in Derby, want it to. And it's been bubbling up over the last couple of months, and it was sort of encapsulated at the end of a Derby planning and zoning meeting recently, where Commissioner Ray Sadlick said, Route 34 widening, we've heard every excuse in the sun. It seems to be cursed. It hasn't moved forward. We've been waiting at least a decade. The chairman of the P&Z said, I remember seeing plans in 1998 for this thing. I mean, we've had Donald Trump has come and gone. There's been other projects that were thought of and put into action and happened, and we're still waiting for Route 34. So, and I've heard this many, many times, state representatives who represent the people in Hartford and state senators, what are you doing to get this thing off the ground finally in Derby?
So a lot. I think that this is something that, I lived in Derby for several years and drove by there every single day, twice a day, going to and from work, and have had a lot of time to think about, what the holdup is. And now that I'm in a position to do something about it, have really dove in pretty quickly, connected with the COG, connected with state officials. And over the last 2 years, there's steps to this process, right? And so one of the things that I thought was interesting that folks may not have realized was going on, that it was in the past 2 years, there was over 200 drill spots done by utility companies. We have a long history in this area. We're very proud of the history that we have, a deep and rich one in our community. It also means that below ground in Route 34, there's a deep and rich history of gnarled wires, tunnels, other utility things from times past. And before you open up the ground to do the project, you have to have a clear idea of what the project is. And so a normal project does not have 200 plus drill sites. There was a push to get the utility companies, and there's several different utility companies, to get them to do the holes. Those are now done. In the fall, I think when I spoke to you last.
Yeah, I don't remember when we last spoke about this, but when you say there was a push, because I think the feeling in Derby among some local officials, and I'm going back years now, they want state representatives and senators to get whoever's holding this up, like, into a room and splash some water on them and maybe get it done, kind of take them by the neck and say, what is going on? So when you say there was a push with these utility companies, because I had heard that was part of the holdup, the utility companies were just sort of being bureaucratic, and that this whole thing is just a bureaucratic nightmare.
There was a conversation that I won't get into all of it, but there was a conversation I had with them and said, listen, you do this or we have problems. And that's as politely as I can say it. I think that we have a very compelling case for why this needs to get done. And there's a lot of scrutiny on the utility companies right now for what they are or not doing for our state. And so if they'd like to have a larger conversation continue, we can have a larger conversation continue about the work that they're doing, or they could do what they're required to do. So luckily they were responsive to that and decided to get this work completed. And so I actually printed out, anticipating this was going to be part of the discussion. You may remember that in December, the COG, who is the overarching handler of this project, they were meeting with the state's engineers, an army of engineers, as it were, to go over this next phase. Basically, it's pull information, get a plan together, analyze the plan, see what the holes are, go to the next step with it, and just percentage of completion. So on the 34 project, let's see here. So the grant, the thing to remember is that the $5 million grant that was secured during Linda Gentile's era is still being used. So this is not a matter at the moment of needing additional, funding per se. They need to release some of the funding on the DOT side, and they want to see the project ready to go. So there's two sections to this project. One is the Derby Shelton Bridge, and one is the 34 proper, and they touch each other. They're interconnected. And there's an order of operations and how they have to get done, because one, if you did them both at the same time, it would actually shut off power for several months, potentially to a large section of Derby. There's no way to work around some of that, where they need to do it in pieces. That way they cannot disrupt some power service, is how it was explained to me. So the bid is already selected for the Derby Shelton Bridge. That is starting. And that's important, because the quicker that they get that underway, the quicker we can clear the way to start the next part. So even though the technical ground break may not happen yet on 34, this is connected. They're adjacent projects and they're interrelated. And you may still see some drilling, some pre-utility work on 34 in preparation for this next step with Route 34. And so from my last discussion with Rick, they're looking at potentially going out to bid later in the summer.
For the Route 34 project.
Yeah.
Later in the summer.
So,
and Rick, is Rick done from... Go ahead. Oh, wait, no, go ahead.
So basically how this works is, we know what our next milestone is. We check in with them. They execute next milestone. We check and say, do you need anything? Where are we? Where do we need to put pressure on? And then we keep going with it. So I think there's been more movement in the past 2 years than maybe the last 10, as far as actual physically touching the road, physically getting the reports together. So fingers crossed, and we'll keep fighting like all heck on it.
And the Rick you had mentioned is Rick Dunn, the executive director of the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments, who will be appearing at tomorrow being February 11th, February 11th meeting of the Derby Board of Aldermen, Alderwomen. Although I just looked at the agenda, he's like way down there, so you're gonna have to sit through a lot. And then Rick will talk for 3 hours about what's going on with these two projects. The thing about the Derby Shelton Bridge, that sort of crept up on me, because I always heard like 34, and then all of a sudden the bridge, and like it's I didn't know they were connected, because I thought the bridge came much later, but that seems to be moving much faster. But that might just be my perception. So that's just me rattling on a hypothesis.
The plans have to line up. There's additional lanes being put in, and there's also some utility interaction that had to be thought out well.
Okay, then in terms of that bridge, that's it's like I think a $5 million project, right? Wasn't something like that was awarded, the $5 to $6 million. And yeah. I wrote basically, the NVCOG sent out a press release, and I put in some background about what's happening in Derby in terms of the redevelopment zone in the last year. 2 projects have been approved there, so that's happening. You have the Route 34 widening looming out there, but the public was like, forget you. This bridge is bogus. I wrote a headline saying this will, improve the downtowns, which was probably a bad headline. I wish I had, if I could take that back, I would. But why do you think that project is important, and why should people care that a bridge is, going to look better and have, because a lot of people are saying this is just lipstick on a pig.
So I want to, people are frustrated, and they rightfully are frustrated. It's taken a really long time for downtown development to happen, and it shouldn't have taken this long. So of course they're upset. I can certainly see why they would look at that and say it's just a bridge. The thing to remember is that, one, there's an order of operations, like, we need to get them both done. 2, it's in the transportation oriented development zone. And so adding the extra lane, traffic flow matters when you're looking at development. Traffic flow really matters. And having a flow where you have bike lanes, where you have walkways between the 2 downtowns, where you have, the ability for the people that potentially will live in the apartments and the mixed use that's going on that may go in down here, for them to have the ability of a walkable downtown is really desirable. And so it's a bargaining chip to attract developers as well. So, you know, when a developer comes in, you know, we brought in Commissioner Lehman recently. Commissioner Lehman as the Director of Economic and Community Development for the state of Connecticut. He's evaluating, you know, where to put folks' tax dollars, and who's ready and who's not ready, and what all the puzzle pieces look like. And we bring him in because we want him to stand in the middle of our downtown, and so we can point and say, do you see how close that train station is? Do you see where that bridge is? This is what the bridge is going to look like in 2 years. This is what is happening right here, so that he understands when we're asking for a certain amount of money for a certain puzzle piece, or need his resources, his staff in DECD to work with our staff and the city level and work with our office. They understand and have a better relationship with that. And it wasn't just Commissioner Lehman came down; it was his deputy commissioner as well. So he brought a team in to really take a closer look at Derby, really take a closer look at Ansonia, sit down in Derby with the full team, with you know, the mayor, with Drew Backlick, with Carmen DeCenzo, and ask some brass tack questions.
Hey, did you hear Harry Connick Jr. taped a music video like a week ago at the Sterling Opera House in Derby?
No, is that true?
I believe it's true. All right, I'm just trying to get some more info. I thought, all right. But, you know, one thing that's sort of frustrating about the Route 34 project, I think, is like, I think it literally destabilizes Derby government to some extent. I've been obsessing over this and fighting with people on Facebook over it because, you know, every 2 years there's an election. And so every 2 years, although everybody in Derby, like, you at least get one term, but it becomes this political hammer that you hit the other side over the head with, you know, going back years now. And it's sort of frustrating to see as like, I'm just an outside. I mean, I live in Derby and like 34 is right there. But like, it's sort of frustrating to see because it's that one project that is always, you know, a political hammer. You can, because it never seems to get done or move forward. It's always easy. So hopefully, you know, it happens. It happens.
It's unfortunate that I think, you know, what we see on the reports and what we see in the, you know, in the checklist where pieces are being checked off, it's all on paper, so it's hard for people to really connect to. But for anyone that has seen the drilling in recent years, that was part of this, and that was a really important part of this to get done, because we need to know before we open up the road what the plan is with it.
Okay. And then in terms, like I had said badly at the beginning of this broadcast today, the governor unveiled his budget. And one thing that's always vitally important, especially to Derby and Ansonia, is actually, before we get to that, let's talk about reimbursement for school construction, because that's also an issue that has been talked a lot about in Derby, because there is a committee working to determine whether it makes sense to regionalize, consolidate, share services between the school districts in Derby and Ansonia. And they're pretty far along, to the point where I know, I believe Jim Gilday, who's the co-chair of that group and the chairman of the Derby Board of Ed, and Joseph Yauman, who's Ansonia alderman and the Ansonia co-chair of that committee. They met with all the yes. You.
Yeah.
And state rep, or I guess was she Mary Wielander, George Cabrera, and Nicole Claridis Dietria. And I'm going to have, this is like part of a new series I'm doing. I'm inviting lawmakers to come on and talk about this thing. So don't accuse me of bias if you haven't been invited on yet. I'm just disorganized. So, and from that meeting, what happened? I saw there's a bill pending that was introduced by the Valley delegation. What the heck is it?
So it's to get more money for the region to help them with this process. So, you know, there was a state grant, and it was given to the towns to form this committee to hire a company to do the study. And now this committee has come to their conclusions with it. They've met with us already. We've discussed what's in it, what they need. We've crafted a proposal. We're now trying to push that through the legislature. And so this was something that, you know, was crafted and signed off on by, you know, me, Mary, George, and Nicole, and consulted with on more than one occasion with Jim and Joe. So there's been a good amount of collaboration happening, which has been really nice because we do better work when we work together. So got that crafted. I've also had personal conversations with the chair of the education subcommittee, which is the committee this is in, that is Representative Sanchez, and have talked to Tone Philippe, who is Representative Philippe, who is also on the subcommittee for education funding for the Appropriations Committee. So met with them, and also met with the Office of Policy Management, which is the governor's office, about this bill. And Senator Cabrera is working on Senator McCrory, who's the co-chair of the committee. So we're working every angle to try to get folks, to advance this bill. The thing is to remember is that every committee has a different way in which they do bills. So some committees, you put your name on the bill goes forward with your bill number, with your title on it. Some committees, like the Education Committee, they kind of put all the bills together in one big bill. So we want to make sure what we're working on is trying to get it through the process of being basically put in a blender and put into the Frankenstein bill. And there's other ways around this too. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask, I thought there was a bill pending that the delegation put together that had to do with reimbursement of school construction.
Yes.
Is that
so
a thing?
That's what this is.
That's that. Okay. Oh, I thought you were saying it's just to get the study completed. I misunderstood.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry.
No, it's probably
so
me.
the study is done. And we're in the process now with what the reimbursement is. So Derby and Ansonia both have a baseline of reimbursement around 76%, 77%. And the current regionalization bonus is around 10%. We want to get as much as we can for our community. That is always the ball game, is get as much as you can for Ansonia and Derby. So we've created a structure for a larger regionalization bonus based on regionalizing with a distressed municipality, which we have 2 of, which means we should get a double bonus for that in our eyes. So we're pushing for a 20% reimbursement instead of 10%. Well, what does that mean? What does that work out to for dollars? If this happens, if we can get this through, what that would mean is the project as a whole is about $20 million. 96% reimbursement, a 10% increase in reimbursement would be about $2 million more.
And that saves at the end of the day, I'm sorry, I keep
the
interrupting.
taxpayers of Ansonia and Derby money.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to point out here, that's what we're talking about here. And I know, and it's been on Facebook today already in various groups. I remember Linda Gentile, I remember Ethan going to the meeting, and she was saying years ago, I even think before Mayor Zekin was mayor in Derby, that look, this is coming. Derby and Ansonia should be talking about these things, and they have, to their credit, for a couple of years now. What do you think? What are the chances of that bill happening, considering that Derby and Ansonia are far along in the process, when there was just another bill introduced, I guess today or whenever, saying smaller communities might be forced to do something like this, and I may be butchering that.
So that was, I believe, Senator Looney's bill. And the thing to remember, and there's a couple overarching things I want folks to remember about kind of like how the mechanics of the legislature, because I see certain things happen at the beginning of the year every year. And I always want to kind of reach out to people and say, don't freak out. It's okay. When we're in the legislative process, there's 151 representatives and 36 senators. Every single one of those folks is elected by their community, and they can introduce a bill on anything they want. So they can introduce a bill to force regionalization, or somebody introduced a bill for tolls again, which we all know is dead. But folks introduce bills on all types of issues. That does not mean that folks should be alarmed, because it does not mean they're going to get far in the process. The legislative process takes months because it is a process of building consensus, and it naturally pushes back the bills that will not have consensus. So things that are unpopular ideas aren't going to get very far. And so I just want folks to know that. So if you see folks online, if they're trying to freak you out or saying, what is this, and just reach out and ask, because we'll let you know. And I know I care very much about making sure that residents in the community are engaged in the process, that know about opportunities to testify, that know about opportunities to weigh in. I put out surveys, I have community coffee events. We want you involved in the process. I know I'm not the only one that feels that way. I know all of my colleagues feel that way. And so reach out. We do better work because of it. But I personally don't think it's going to get very far with forced regionalization. My bill, the bill
that's forced, but what? Yeah, your bill. Do you think that has a better
does
chance?
not force?
Right. Do you think your bill has a better, or the one from the Valley delegation, including yourself, has a better chance of being approved, considering Derby and Ansonia are way ahead of the curve?
So I think that in some form, I'm hopeful that it's going to get pushed forward, and we're certainly pushing very hard on it. I'm working with my leadership as well to advocate on this bill. They're aware, they're very aware of the situation in Ansonia and Derby. I've been very vocal about the issues that we have down here with economic distress. So, and the other avenue is to go directly through the Office of Policy Management. And so we're not confining ourselves to one avenue. We're using all avenues to work this. And the thing to remember is that if this is approved, it's going to be basically an if. So if this is approved, it's going to say this money is on the table if Ansonia and Derby approve it. If Ansonia and Derby as towns both vote and say that this is what the path they want to take, then we go into the next phase of this process, which involves applying for the funds. So there's an additional process with paperwork and deadlines that has to be done by the state, but we're not there yet. Until the towns approve that, we can't go on to the next step.
And that's a great thing to point out because, as you also said earlier, but I interrupted, this is not forced. Just because this bill is happening doesn't mean the will of the people, the literal will of the people will be subverted in any way, because it's still any proposal, if it comes, has to be approved by the voters in both towns. All right, cool. School funding. I know I read in the CT Mirror the other day, there was a press conference among a whole bunch of different advocates calling for equity in education funding. And this is something we hear in Derby and Ansonia. I mean, you usually hear Bridgeport in the larger cities, but we're sort of mini versions of those communities, where for years now, we've never gotten our fair share of funding from the state, to run the schools. There's this idea, well, it's, that goes up every year. We're going to have full funding by whatever year, 2022 or something like that. But this was saying we want our money now. And then today, Governor Lamont in his bill, from what I read, again, this is not like first person coverage, and I have a feeling you might know more than me. He says, all right, we're gonna freeze our state funding that we had promised the last couple of years. That's going to stay as is. But we got this windfall from the feds because of pandemic. We have all this pandemic money. You're going to get a ton of that money. But I think automatically, and I saw it already a little on Ansonia Facebook, there's people saying like, oh, wait a second. We've been underserved to some extent by the state. We want the money that's due to us, plus this money that's coming as well. Where do you stand? And did I just butcher that whole explanation?
No, you're doing great. And, one, I always want the most money possible for our students. First and foremost, I want our kids to have the education they deserve. The fact that we're underfunded, makes me quite upset too. And, and that gets voiced pretty often in Hartford. There's a coalition of legislators. As you mentioned, there's articles about legislators that have spoken up about this. There's a coalition of legislators, myself and Senator Cabrera and others in the Valley included, who have been very vocal about this and are pushing for efforts to fix the ECS formula to get more funding to the schools. So one thing I want to impress upon folks is that the governor's budget presentation is his presentation. The Appropriations Committee, the Finance Committee, then separately as the legislature create their own, budget plan. And then the negotiations start around April. So we're a separate body. And we have separate ideas sometimes. There are things we like, there's things we dislike. There's things that we are going to have hard lines and say no way. And there's things that he's going to have hard lines and say no way. And so this is the kickoff of the process. It's one part of the presentation, but this is definitely not an ending point. I think a good example of that is 2 years ago, it was tolls, right? So it was the governor wanted tolls. The Republicans said, no, we know we have to fund the special transportation fund. We want to raid the rainy day fund and bond the rest, borrow the rest. And there were those of us who said, we don't like either of those ideas. and so neither of them happened. And so when you see things in January, February, it's the beginning of the process. It's like all the ingredients are on the table. We have not made the soup yet. And so we're going to see this progress. We're going to put up opportunities for folks to testify. And then we'll see. I think today Speaker Ritter described it as it's basketball season. We haven't gotten to the Final Four, not even close. So the proposals that are going to really get there are not even negotiated yet.
And the CT Mirror, CT News Junkie, and all the state media reported that there are no tolls this time in Lamont's plan to fix our transportation fund, but there is a mileage tax on trucks. The fear before this was unveiled, and I guess it's still out there to some extent. Well, it starts off with trucks, but then it goes to me in my 2006 Pontiac vibe. I'm going to have to be paying out the wazoo. Where do you think that's something you'll support? In terms of the mileage tax on trucks?
So we received a 200-page document today, and I received it a few hours ago. So we're going to be going line by line and really scrutinizing these. There was no detail given on what this is, how it would work. And, I'm a firm believer in getting all of the information and giving it to the residents and having that conversation first, especially with hot button issues. So I just don't know enough yet because he presented it this afternoon, and
that's fine.
It'll be scrutinized.
How about the other one? Because I don't want to take up too much of your time because there's some things that you want to talk about. Marijuana. I'm so confused because the way it was sort of presented in the documents that I saw.
One statement, marijuana? I'm so confused.
Well, yeah, I'm confused about a lot of things. I'm not saying those are connected, but the way that the proposal is online on the governor's website, it's so passive. Is marijuana legal? I don't know what's going on. But then we're going to get the money for marijuana, and that's going to like plow the roads here in Derby. What's happening there? And I don't mean to make light of it but I am. But what's going on?
So I think it's not a matter of if, but when. With this policy, all the states around us are doing it. Nationally, multiple states have already legalized and regulated it for recreational use. And it's gotten to be a much more serious bill in recent years in the legislature. So it used to just be a bill and someone would put it up every year, and it didn't really have much body or depth to it. I guess you could say it didn't have substance in it. Now what's happening is you're seeing the bill being submitted to the various committees that would manage various aspects of it, right? And so the Public Health Committee has certain components, and the Judicial Committee has certain components. And how we're going to regulate the businesses and who's going to get the licensing, and all of that is being more seriously structured in these bills. And the fact that it was on the governor's proposal list means that it's something he seriously wants to do. And it's also the first time he's actually put it into his budget. So while he mentioned it 2 years ago, he didn't bank on it by putting it into the budget. I think that the policy development has gone a lot farther in the past few years than it has previously. And so I'm hopeful it will get there. I've done enough surveying of our district to know that the majority of our districts, a large majority of our districts, supports this.
Supports legalized recreational marijuana use.
Yes, and do it in a way that's thoughtful and respectful of those that are apprehensive, right? So I don't think we're not going to be California. We're Connecticut, and we do things differently out here. And so we have one of the most strongly regulated and professionally regulated medical programs in the country. And I think that we can be an example of doing things in a way that is respectful to all parties, but moves us forward on this.
Okay, then I said I would turn it over to you, but one other thing that I wanted to ask you, because I keep attending police commission meetings in Derby, and then Gene Falbo-Sosnovich attended a police commission meeting in Seymour, and they're both the chiefs in both towns. Or in Derby, the budget hasn't been presented, but Chief Narowski keeps saying, and Sitkowski up in Seymour, this bill's going to cost taxpayers money. And they keep going back to equipment, basically. They're saying equipment. Narowski's mentioned all this new mandated training, and it's money they feel they just don't have. Derby, I guess the first year there's 50% reimbursement for Derby since it's a economically distressed city. But what's the latest on that? Because they keep thinking or hoping that some of these aspects of that bill will be re-looked at, that it could change because they're saying it's going to be expensive?
So it's funny you mentioned that, because I was actually just on a call about this issue today. I can't speak for other legislators in other parts of the state, but I'm very sensitive to the facts that we are distressed municipalities. I've had conversations with both the chiefs. I spoke with the chiefs before the bill, after the bill, have taken information from them. I'm in the process of getting a larger list of what their concerns are. I have a list for one of the towns. I'm working on the other town. And so there is the 50% reimbursement for distressed municipalities, which both towns would qualify for. But I've also gone.
You're talking Derby and Ansonia, because I threw Seymour,
Yes.
but you actually don't represent Seymour. So
No.
You're talking Derby and Ansonia.
Yes, it's 30% for Seymour. For the other towns, it's 30%, but it's 50%.
Oh, that's right. Your whole family is from Seymour. So even though you don't represent that, that's where, yeah.
My family's from all over the valley. My dad actually grew up on Anson Street in Derby. He used to crawl around the green in Derby, playing Army when he was a kid. Yeah. And my great grandfather moved to the north end of Ansonia. I've got photos of him from 1927 in Ansonia.
See, I'm the worst kind of valley resident. I moved up from New York like 15 years ago, so everybody hates me. Your pizza's not that good. All right, sorry, that has nothing to do. So you talk to these police chiefs and you have a list of their concerns.
Yeah, so I'm working with them. I've been pretty clear, that we want to see more done to help the community, to help our departments on this front. So, it is being taken seriously. It is being discussed, and we're bringing it to the right folks in the right departments in Hartford about it.
Okay, and there's much more we could talk about even on that topic, and the increase in juvenile crime we keep hearing about locally. But I wanted to sort of turn it over to you for a minute, because I saw, anybody can go and look up the bills your name is on, bills you've introduced. There's a lot of interesting stuff on there connected to the Waterbury line, sort of hits all the big areas. What are your goals, I guess, for this session? I mean, COVID's still here, obviously, and that hasn't gone away. But what are some bills you're, for lack of a better word, excited about?
So first, the past year has been really hard for our residents. And being in the position that I'm in, I think legislators have really been on the front lines. When folks didn't know who to call and what direction to turn to, we were getting hundreds of emails a day, and responding to folks really quickly. So a lot of the community has spoken with me or Mary Ann, my assistant, to handle unemployment issues, to handle, small business issues, to handle rent and mortgage support, or healthcare issues. I mean, you name it, we've handled it in the past year. And so first and foremost, getting folks onto more stable ground. For everyone that lost jobs or is now underemployed, I'm really focused on workforce development. I'm the vice chair of the Commerce Committee, and I'm on the Higher Ed and Workforce Development Committee. And that's intentional. I've been on them my first term and this term too, and that's because this region needs this type of attention so much. And you need folks from distressed municipalities that have the problems that we have to be in these committees and pushing policy that affects us. So, standing up some workforce development policy and focusing some resources on us and on distressed municipalities is a big one of mine. I'm working on a bill that would create savings for manufacturers and incentivize them to hire people in distressed municipalities. There's obviously the Waterbury train line, and that's going to be huge for this region. And it's huge even if you don't ride the trains. And so for folks that don't ride the trains, transportation-oriented development is a very real phenomenon, and it brings people to the community, people that will create vibrant downtowns, and help grow our grant list and help to lower taxes for residents. So this is all related. I can't set the tax rate in Ansonia or Derby, but I can help to create policy that's going to support development in our communities. So jobs, economic development is huge for me. Healthcare is huge. I mentioned I was on a public hearing for 12 and a half hours yesterday, and it was a public hearing on a public option for healthcare. And, I think there's this misconception that it's going to cost, a lot of money. And that's why with policy, it's so important. The devil's in the details. And with this particular proposal, which is crafted by Kevin Lembo, our controller, it actually doesn't cost, if you don't purchase the healthcare, it doesn't cost you anything. And all it's doing is opening up the healthcare that I have as a legislator to small businesses and nonprofits. So Eugene, if you are paying a lot in healthcare and we get this bill through, you could potentially buy the same healthcare coverage that I have at a cheaper rate. And that's the goal, right? Is to make it more affordable for people because people are struggling. So
That's interesting. Now, where's that bill go from the public hearing that happened yesterday?
So any bill that's going to potentially get out of committee, we call it, any bill that's going to get a vote to possibly pass committee, which is one of the first few barriers, needs to have a public hearing. This is the democratic process. We want the public must be involved. And so when I introduce a bill, when anyone introduces a bill, I'll give you an example. So there was 5,000 bills that were introduced in my first term in legislature in 2019. They get funneled to all the different committees that they could possibly, that they belong in. The chairs of those committees and the executives of those committees then do a screening process and say, oh, these are duplicates. This doesn't belong in our committee. This one seems viable. Call this legislator and find out what they mean by this, and starts putting them together and saying, okay, these ones are not going to go anywhere. Just set them aside. These ones are things we should bring to the committee. So then they go to the committee decides if they want to raise it as a concept, put some language into it, bring it for a public hearing, vote to draft it, and then eventually vote it out of committee. So these are all steps that need to be taken. Once it gets out of committee, it goes through additional screening processes. So just because it gets out of committee, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to the floor for a vote either. Typically, by the time a bill gets to the floor of the House, it is already, even when it leaves committee, there's months of additional work done on it to get it right, to work with stakeholders.
So
and eventually,
do you think that this one is going to move forward, or is it one of those you're just going to toss to the side and say, I forget it?
Healthcare. So this bill, I think that there's there's a lot of support for this, right? I mean, people need affordable healthcare, and enough is enough. This is if ever there were a time that folks were keenly aware of the importance of healthcare, it's now, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic, and people have lost their jobs, and when you lose your job, you lose your healthcare, and it's been a crisis. And so creating sane and affordable pathways is life or death for people. I mean, the stories that we heard yesterday were heartbreaking and all too common. And we can wait for the insurance companies to do the right thing on their own, or we can understand that part of public policy is creating policies that work for people. And so I would say if I'm your rep, you already got me, I'm voting for it. If I'm not your rep and you're watching this, call your rep and tell them that if you believe in this and you want this done, call your rep and tell them that you want them to vote for it. Tell them you want to see it supported. So we'll have a vote now that we're done with public hearing to get it out of committee. And then if it passes committee, then it will get screened and more negotiations will happen. I hope it will get to the floor for a vote, but I don't know yet.
And then just in terms of all the bills that'll be coming forward the next couple of months, the fact that COVID's still here and Connecticut is being run essentially by the governor, an executive order. Does that make it? I mean, are we going to return to a day? I mean, I know we're eventually going to return, but does COVID dominate everything? It's like, they say Joe Biden can't get anything done the first 100 days because there's an impeachment going on. That's what, one anti-impeachment argument. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just stating that's an argument that's been made. Does that happen? Or is that happening in Connecticut? We're talking about all these bills, but COVID's still here. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. And that's still the first, we're still trying to get the vaccine out to everybody. What impact is that having on the normal everyday job you do, other than the obvious of on Zoom all day long for 13 hours?
So I think we're obviously much more geared towards recovery for, in 1,000 different ways, whether it's, the businesses that are struggling, the families who have taken a serious financial hit and it'll take a long time to recover, people who have gotten sick and are long haulers that need assistance, people who are, there's a rent and mortgage crisis looming. There's a lot that needs to get done. And some of it we're waiting on the federal dollars, right? The state can't print money, but the feds can. And so we're waiting to see what they're putting in their final package, because that's going to dictate to us what we do to an extent. It's part of why that the budget coming up now, we need to wait and see, because the federal dollars that are going to come in are going to have rules attached to them. And so it makes no sense to say, I'm going to put this much to this and this much to that, when we might get a federal package that says, no, this money has to go to this. And so we don't want to double up. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So,
it does, yeah.
so there's a lot of moving parts right now. And as far as, the focus, we can walk and chew bubble gum. And I think that part of why, this is a double-edged sword, or it's not even a double-edged sword. It's just a difficult process, is because there's the immediate recovery that we're working on. There's all of these immediate and pressing things, and your first focus is always your residents. And then there's the legislating and gearing all of this policy. And I do have to say that, unless you have 3 computers, it takes twice as long to get anything done working legislating remotely, because the conversations, a lot of this is conversations, right? It's getting you to care about my bill as much as I care about my bill, and having those meetings in the hallway and grabbing folks before and after meetings. And you can't do that when you're on Zoom, right? And so everything just takes a little bit longer. We passed 278 bills in my first year, and I'd be surprised if we do 120 this year.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you for answering that. Yeah. And I guess my last question, because I guess I always have to ask about it, and I don't mean to smile, but the Valley Firefighter Training School, which is ready to go, but Governor Lamont gives us the high hat, apparently. Is there any chance, do you think that'll ever move forward, or is it just over?
It's not dead. It's not a dead project. And I'm in touch with the board of the Valley Fire School regularly. I think that the thing is that, when there's a lot of really, what sounds like mundane updates, you check in with the stakeholder, you check in with the board of the fire school, you let them know what's happening, or the timeline. Until we know what's happening with federal dollars in the budget, that always happens first. What we saw, and each governor's a little bit different. So, Governor Malloy did a lot more bonding than Governor Lamont does. Governor Lamont holds the purse strings a little tighter. And he has done several small bondings and then one large one. And that's where a lot of projects were done. So if that pattern holds, then we're going to expect that there's going to be some small bonding, and then there will be a large one at some point down the road. I don't expect, just being realistic about how this is all structured, that anything will probably happen before the budget is sorted out. And so, this is something that I'm in touch regularly with the board of the fire school. They're aware of. I also have 2 bills in on the fire service right now that I'm working on with them. So, there's lots of ways to help the volunteer fire service. And you've probably heard me say it 1,000 times. I'm a little bit of a sucker on this issue, in the sense that I was raised in it, and it's extremely close to my heart. It's not an abstract to me, talking about, the guys that get up in the middle of the night to go and, pull somebody out of a car when their car slides on a snowbank in a storm. That's how I was raised. It was what I grew up with. And so, whether I know the firefighter or not, they're like family to me, I guess you could say. So, there's a handful of people that really know policy well with the fire service in Hartford. So I'm one of a few. There's a Pat Boyd out in the eastern part of the state. Representative Boyd is a volunteer firefighter himself. Representative Cook up in Torrington, and there's a few others, Susan Johnson, who are really huge advocates in the fire service. So I'm honored to be in that group.
So we'll see what happens there. All right, Representative Rochelle, is there anything else you wanted to add? I thought this was going to be a half hour. It turned out to be more like an hour. Sorry about that. But before we call it a day.
I am doing, just want to plug. So prior to COVID, there was twice monthly community coffee office hours that I did in district. I would do them at a location in Ansonia, location in Derby. With COVID, obviously we can't do that, but we're re-upping the program and doing it via Zoom. So I'll have a flyer up on my state rep page, including Senator Cabrera, may include some of the other delegation at some point too. But wanted to just plug that and say, if you are somebody that has interested in learning more about the process, questions about any of the bills that are coming up, ideas, feedback, don't hesitate to be in touch. It's important that you're part of the process. This is democracy in action. And so don't hesitate to be in touch.
All right. Awesome. Well, I want to thank you again for taking the time to do this. I very much appreciate it. And I guess I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you, Eugene.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.